Right, we're in business. So, welcome to the Lifetime Horse. Before we actually get started into the details, I'm just going to introduce myself and then allow Bradley to do him. So, I'm Nika Vorster. I've spent over 30 years working with horses. Started my career as an athlete, flat racing. I was a jockey, and then I went into dressage, so very similar or not. Absolutely loved that. Worked my way up to Prix St George and represented GB with the MCI. That was an insane experience. I'm so glad I did that on Iberian horses. And then the last 5 years, I've really kind of focused on chiropractic and working as a biomechanics specialist with horses around the world. I've also written a book which is called The Female Rider Code, and this focuses on us as females in the room and how we show up for our horses. It's a real, truly believe what's going to kind of emerge more nowadays is actually how we take care of ourselves and how much the horses are picking up on that. So, but for tonight, I'm actually here to share more about the lessons I've learned with horses, especially when it comes to the different ages. And we're going to share that in detail. So before I continue, Bradley.
Hello, everybody. My name's Bradley Whale. So I'm a equine osteopath, but I'm not in competition with Nika, so don't worry about that at all. Everyone always kind of thinks there's a little bit of rivalry going on between osteopaths, physios, and chiropractors. Nah, not really. So a little bit about me. I'm an osteopath for, this gets a bit scary, 25 years on humans and horses. I wrote, or basically very early in my career, I wrote three books on the horse and rider relationship. So I wrote one on biomechanics, I wrote one on physiology, and one on psychology, sociology, and behavior and spirituality. Um, I have basically worked. It's easier to say what I haven't done, which is actually very little. I have been an international athlete myself. Either I was a national and international show jumper, but then I grew too big. I was 6'5", or I am 6'5". So when you're show jumping, you're way too big for that. Especially when you're jumping 140s, 160s plus. Um, I then moved into rowing. So I did Olympic level rowing and was the non-traveling reserve for the 2008 Olympics, which is the worst position ever to be in. So after that, I then worked in Formula One. I worked for the Olympic team as a therapist. And I have gained a reputation for complex cases and complex theories. Um, and I am in the process of writing a huge number of papers on the uh, philosophy and process of adaptation, and how that works in horses and riders, in humans, society, and various things like that. So, always a lot kind of going on with all of us, both Nika and me. There's always something going on. So, but yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you, Bradley. For those of us that have joined, as a few that have just come in, if you have any questions, just write them down. I have put everyone on mute for now, so just so we can keep it smooth. And yeah. So what are you guys going to learn tonight? First of all, how your horse's stage of life changes and what it needs. So, why there is this developing, mature, and veteran horse, and how they speak what we've kind of put a little bit of a play on it, a different language. We know they're talking horse, but we kind of put a different bit of a spin on it to make us realize that these stages are fundamental to the longevity of our horses. The second thing we're going to be looking at is these early warning signs. So, they are often, as they always are with our horses, quite small, can be easy to miss, but can be very, very consequential if we don't recognize them. So we're going to go through those signs for you guys. And the last thing is, if I can move my face away here, is the practical changes that you can make straight away. So simple adjustments to your either training, your management, that is actually matched to what stage of life that your horse is in. I'm just going to see if I can move that over there. So by the end, you will look at your horse, hopefully with more confidence and far less of this second guessing, which a lot of us can get into a spiral. As a thank you for joining us tonight, Bradley and I have created a very special toolkit. Um, we'll go through it at the end, step by step, but just hang on right to the end as we'll share it with you. So, Bradley, you're going to start us off with the force chain.
Yes. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be kind of bouncing around so you don't get bored of one person's voice and fall asleep. So we're going to be mixing it up a little bit. So first and foremost, what we call the force chain, and it's actually a very simple kind of explanation, is all we're talking about is essentially the horse is one entirely connected system. So when you're looking at how the horse moves, the propulsion starts in the hind end, theoretically. And let's just use this as a dressage or a kind of dressage situation or a show jumping situation. The propulsion starts in the hind end. It then travels up into the pelvis, goes through what we call the lumbar and the thoracic spine, which is where we talk about the thoracic wave. And if you want, I will go into more detail about that. But if that's only if you are interested. It's basically talking about how the thoracic spine and the lumbar spine actually move and oscillate with the movement and the kind of how much power is generated into the pelvis, and how that is then transitioned through the spine like a wave, um, through the spine into the thoracic sling. Now, you may have heard about the thoracic sling, that it's a connection of muscles in and around the shoulder girdle, the chest, into the neck as well, and how that then is then sent into the head, the neck, where we're talking about balance. And that's where, as a rider, you're then using your hands, your seat, your leg in order to kind of help counterbalance that enormous amount of power which is generated into the pelvis. So it works, and that's the whole point of this, is that the whole body works as one singular chain. So when we are looking at the aging horse or we are looking at the young horse, we need to have very clearly in our mind that one problem which starts somewhere else is going to almost always show up in another place. Okay. So the front end may actually be showing a hind end issue, and so on and so forth. So we just want you to kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at the young horse, the older horse, or mature horse, and the veteran horse. Now, how that presents is slightly different in every age bracket, which is why we're kind of doing this little kind of lecture to help explain it. Okay?
Perfect.
That's it.
So following on from that, we've split this into these three paradigms of life, and this is what everything hangs on tonight. So we're kind of stripping away that the horse is just speaking one language to us, and we're trying to sort problems out or find out, what's going on. If we look at it as it's speaking these three different languages, from 0 to 10 years, we have the formation, the building itself. So horses are learning how to organize their body and fundamentally carry load. We then have horses that we've put in this 10 to 20 years old where they are in optimization. So they're at this peak, highly efficient and refined, working close to their limits without always showing it. And that's a really key point there. And then we have from 20 years on our golden oldies, which I know a few of you have completed the questionnaire that you really want some support on this. So we've got you covered. In this kind of reorganization, they're shifting from being peak, this pure, efficient way, into managing what capacity that they actually have left. So if we think of it for those of us that are fortunate to have had, or we have a youngster right now and we're thinking, okay, I can now set the foundation for the rest of my horse's life. We're thinking of the same horse, but looking at three different languages depending on their age. I'm going to talk you through the first, which is the formation building, and then Bradley's going to take over and talk to us about the mature and the golden oldies, the veterans. So, looking at this, looking at the building, here's the first thing that I really want to, for all of us to understand, that a young horse's body just simply can't support itself the same way as an adult's body can yet. So I've heard a lot of people say to me, well, my, a horse under the age of 10 is, especially when they're not even started yet, is just surely a smaller version of the horse is going to be, right? So in a grown horse, if we think about it from a physiology perspective, their tendons and ligaments are like springs. So they are holding the horse steady on their own. Now, if we flip that to our younger horses and horses under the age of 10, we're going to see a completely different situation going on here. We're going to see that they maybe have highly mobile, very what we call kind of stretchy, layman's terms here, but they're not steady. They can't stabilize themselves yet. So imagine like a new rubber band that you've just bought, right? And what happens because of this difference is the muscles start to take over and they end up working overtime to help the young horses with their balance. The flip side of that is, though, these muscles tire and they tire quickly. And this is why young horses get tired. A lot of us can confuse that with things like, oh, they look messy, they look uncoordinated, they look bored, oh, they're frustrated. And what if it's not naughtiness? What if it's just the structure just isn't quite ready yet? And a number that surprises a lot of us, and it's definitely emerging more and more, is actually understanding that the skeleton doesn't fully mature. And this is again can vary depending on the breed, the structure of the horse, until around the age of 6 and even older. So I have definitely seen this all over the world. Anyone notice these big, flashy, moving young horses nowadays? They just seem to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm thinking, who's going to ride these? Because I'm not like Bradley, who's way taller than me, like double my height. I'm half the size of him. And I'm thinking, like, are these young horses going to be sound at the age of 11? Because in too often, unfortunately, they're not. All the parts are there at a very early age. They're all there. It's like they're hardwired and it is installed, but the horse just doesn't know how to use it and how to put it all together. So I often refer to these big horses that I see as they have the look, they have the power, but they have absolutely zero stability. And it's almost like Bambi on ice. So a lot of us in these ages, the stage with our horse, will recognize it with things like inconsistency in their training. Many of us will see the head and neck carriage looking inconsistent, rhythm, balance. A lot of us would say it's just started tripping this month. Last month it was absolutely fine. Now it's tripping. Do I need to change the shoeing? Do I need to completely, what do I need to do? And a lot of us can almost confuse this change in, general clumsiness with there being a problem. So I'd always say to those of us that have had children or have even had like nieces and nephews, and we see like these lanky teenagers that suddenly just grow 6 inches over a short period, there's going to be a period, there's going to be during that period some inconsistency in they're probably walking to doors, they're probably going to be tripping over themselves because their body is getting used to this change. And this is an internal thing that I'm not sure, and this is why Bradley and I put this together. We're actually very aware of this. We see it as horse owners, but how do we know how to manage these beautiful horses at the stage? Because these years are the foundation. So that wobbliness, that clumsiness, is actually not a fault that we need to be training out. And what happens if it's just the body learning? It's the body adapting. Now, unfortunately, what a lot of us are seeing is that we get these young horses and they look a bit wobbly and a bit uncoordinated. And unfortunately, the first thing that we tend to do is we clamp them up, we put side reins on, and we think, right, fix the frame to learn how to go. You're right, you've heard all this kind of language that people use. We'll just put the side reins on and show it where it must go. But what if we're actually interrupting the very process that the horse is building and needing full coordination as an adult? What happens if they need to be a bit clumsy to figure it out for themselves? If we just provide the right environment for them. And it's not just the body, right? You know, how a young horse actually feels can shape how it moves. So a tense, worried horse that tightens up after I've also just explained how much the muscles end up taking more of the workload. Now, if you're working with a young horse that's very tight and tense, you know, that's going to completely change the way and amount of work that we can do with them. It's going to completely unsettle their entire system compared to a horse that's maybe a bit more laid back, a bit more relaxed. And these are the factors that we need to consider when we are looking at what we need to be training and how we need to be training our young horses. And this all brings into the real danger and the kind of take home for this age, especially, is fatigue. So the body keeps whatever pattern gets the job done. Okay, that's it. Whether it's a right pattern or a wrong pattern, depending on whoever's there. So when we push these tired horses, we're actually wiring into these messy ones. And this makes a repetitive, permanent pattern. And then we wonder why, when they get maybe into the teens or they get into that kind of peak stage over 10, why they suddenly feel so fixed in the frame. And then we got to go back and think, well, actually, maybe if we didn't have the privilege of owning the horse at a younger age, but how was that trained? Was it trained with that clamped in frame for so many years? The golden rule that I really want to leave you with on this section is to finish the session before the horse gets tired. Fatigue embeds this messy compensatory patterns that are there for life. So if you have a young horse right now, this is an optimal time for you to wire them into those good patterns and to avoid the fixed tense patterns that we see so often nowadays in our horses over the age of 10. One last thing before I hand over to Bradley is that remember, with young horses, it is never a straight line. A young horse can sometimes go backwards for a while, and it can be so frustrating before you feel like you've even taken one step forward. So the best thing I would say, and I'm sure Bradley, you can say what you want to hear, is for me with young horses, it's so important to take record and to take notes and to recognize these patterns, because it can be a very daunting, and I work with a lot of people who say, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here, because last month we were going absolutely fine, and this month I felt like I've got my 4-year-old back who can't even trot in a straight line. And so the best thing I would say is start observing your horses, start tracking, start taking photos, start writing down little notes after each session, because in every session they're giving you feedback. And the most important thing we want with young horses is to identify when is the fatigue so that we cannot push. We don't want to push our horses into fatigue.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. The beauty about um, young horses is their huge amount of flexibility, their huge amount of potential. And you're right. You know, we in the most polite way possible, we have a greater potential to screw it up, and that, as you said, you know, with the young horse, the fatigue is the biggest driver of compensatory issues and injuries and various things like that. So you're absolutely spot on, Nika, with that, because it is a big it's a big common problem, especially when you start looking at how the society and the culture of the equine industry promotes the younger horse. Um, so when we start looking at the horse in these kind of various stages, and the reasons there are, just before we kind of go into kind of the next stage, is just to very lightly explain. Um, we can talk, both me and Nika can do much deeper dives into each of these stages. This is just a very kind of light kind of overview of what knowledge we have in terms of this. So just be aware. If you do have questions, throw them in at the end, and we can go into a lot of a deeper dive, both me and Nika, on all of this. So don't worry if you've kind of got some questions, because there's a lot of things which we can kind of talk about. But when we start talking about the next phase, which is the kind of performance stage, if you kind of think of it that way, this stage now is kind of like the middle bit. Well, not kind of, it is the middle bit. It is impacted by the first stage, the first 10 years, and then it impacts this phase, then impacts the veteran stage. So why is this really important? Is because theoretically, if you have developed your horse, your young horse, with sympathy, understanding that actually the horse is uncoordinated and it needs time to become more coordinated, and it needs time to develop the muscles and the nerves and the kind of the perception of balance and coordination, all of that. If that has gone well, then stage two is like you putting your foot down in a car, going, then ramping it up, going from 0 to 60 miles an hour. It is so quick, because suddenly, all of a sudden, and I'm sure people have noticed this, is that kind of the horse, the younger horse, or the performance owned by some performance riders, the younger horse which they're developing doesn't do very well, doesn't do very well in competitions, doesn't do very well in practice, so on and so forth. And you're watching its performance and it's not really that great. It suddenly then gets to 10, 11, 12, and all of a sudden that horse rapidly accelerates up the levels. And I'm using, for example, dressage as an example. Is this horse will suddenly just accelerate up through the levels and start getting some phenomenal scores. Now, the reason for that is because what they've done is they've taken their time with the younger horse, developing the coordination and the balance and what everything which Nika has talked about, not fatiguing it, not getting compensatory issues. Now, what we don't want, that's what we're looking for, that kind of peak performance, that acceleration, and you're just flying. Now, what we don't want is you getting into stage two and the maturity and the performance phase of your horse, and you're actually sat there going, well, now I've got to undo, because the horse was overworked in the younger age. So that's why we're kind of talking about the stages, but that's also why at this stage it is heavily impacted by what's happening in the first 10 years. Okay. So what does actually happen in this middle phase, this kind of middle 10 years? So what happens in this kind of middle phase is essentially the horse becomes more efficient. Now, what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is that efficiency causes an increase in performance. Okay? So think of it as a kind of, at the beginning stage, when the first 10 years, the horse is chaotic, it's wobbly, it's all over the place. The nerves are growing, the muscles getting stronger, so on and so forth. But now you've got a horse with strong muscles, it is well coordinated, it is balanced. That has now, the horse it doesn't have to work on any more coordination, because it's already got it. Now you've just got to focus on getting the muscles stronger. So all of a sudden, all the body is thinking about, everything which the body is focused on is get stronger. It is not spending currency or resources developing nerves or trying to grow muscle. It is now just get strong. So suddenly that is very, very efficient. And that is what happens in this kind of this middle phase. Now, what that means is there is a slight problem with that, with performance, this kind of middle phase, is that the tissues then become more specialized. Okay. So when we are talking about a dressage horse, they will develop the muscular tissue which is specialized for dressage. You try getting a dressage horse to then suddenly do an endurance competition. It doesn't have the tissue, it doesn't have the like the vascular supply, the neurological supply, and everything like that. It is not very efficient. Imagine getting a marathon runner to then suddenly do a 100-meter sprint. They're not going to be very good because the marathon runner's muscular tissue is designed for endurance. A gymnast, which is very similar to dressage, is very specialized for flexibility, for stability, so on and so forth. It is not particularly efficient for explosive power when trying to do show jumping. Okay, that's why in the equine world, eventing is one of the most complex and difficult sports for horses and riders because essentially it is kind of like triathlon in the human world. You're trying to be exceptional on all three things, which is why it's really difficult. But the reasons why I say that is because the tissue specialization which you get in the specific discipline basically has a bit of a trade-off because you're becoming more precise in your body or the horse's body. And what that means is that because of the efficiency increase, it then becomes more precise. Because it's more precise, the horse is then trying to avoid mistakes.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's something which is really important to understand is that with the mature horse, the horse is getting more efficient, is getting more precise, and then because of that precision, it is trying to avoid the mistakes, irrespective if there is a problem, if there is a compensatory problem. The horse doesn't matter. It's going to try and basically avoid the mistake. Okay. Now, the other thing which we've also got to remember is compensation, because there's a lot of talk about compensation mechanics and various things like that in horses. Is in the young horse, you can make a load of mistakes when riding it. You can be unbalanced, you can bounce around and all of that type of stuff. The young horse can absorb it because it's really flexible and the tissues are really soft. In this phase, the middle phase, the horse basically the compensation pattern becomes invisible within the horse. So you won't see the mistakes, you won't see the compensation until almost the horse breaks, which is why it is really important to make sure that the rider is sorted, that the tack is looked at, that there's the whole ecosystem around the horse in this phase is designed to reduce as any kind of pressure points for the horse as much as possible. Okay. That's why I'm saying is that at the end, the last bit of text, it says, the mature horse makes hard work look easy because of the efficiency, because of the precision. But the problem is that is the exact problem
Hmm.
because it then hides compensatory mechanics because it's so efficient, because it is now makes hard work look easy. Okay. So it's really important to understand is that this kind of middle phase, you're looking at these horses and you almost have to be very, very particular. You have to kind of look over every minuscule detail to make sure um, that they're not hiding something, which is really common. Um, so yes, I think that is about it.
Bradley, can I ask as well, is I think it's also an example to what you've just said is why I certainly see and why I feel so many horse owners are caught out because they don't understand why well, we've taken years to develop this, right?
Yeah,
That, so say someone buys a off the track thoroughbred that's been racing for those developmental information years. Most of it's like let's just say best one in the world, it races till it's 10 years old, okay?
yeah,
Let's just imagine that can happen. It races
Yep.
until 10 years old, doesn't break down.
Yep.
Then it gets sent to someone else to do dressage.
Yes.
Then we get called in and there's problems to fix. Usually got kissing spine, all these problems.
Yep.
But what hopefully from what Bradley said and what I've said, you can see now why these problems are there. From what we've just said, from these information years to from building to peak, how refined that horse has learned to become. Now suddenly it's expected to do dressage, and unfortunately, the change in the change in the demand has such a huge impact on horses that we don't, I think, really give them that bit of relief in, okay, we have to go right back to basics and then some because we now have to rewire everything. It's the same with a show jumper that then changes to dressage, whatever it is.
Yep.
Um, just to give some, because I know some of you have, we buy horses off the track or we buy horses that have done show jumping for many years, age of 15. Now we want them to go and do something totally different. And this is why a lot of us have these problems and find problems that
The
come
other
up.
the other thing which is really important to understand is that especially in this kind of middle phase of the horse is that we commonly misinterpret performance as proof of health. It's a really weird thing. And we do this as humans. We do this as clinicians. We do this as vets. We do this as where we believe that a high performing horse therefore must be healthy. And it's not. It's a high performance horse is just very, very efficient and precise at what it is doing. It can be doing it with a compensatory mechanic or a compensation within the body, and that compensation, and it's also where you find it quite fascinating when you talk to people about compensation patterns. Compensation patterns are not bad. They're actually they're really effective and efficient because they're a process for the body to do something more efficiently as possible. Sometimes the compensation pattern is actually counter, it actually works against what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. But the real big takeaway is, especially kind of what I'm saying now, is compensations aren't bad. They're just really effective ways of trying to get the result which you want. Now, that compensation, when you start looking at it, compensation patterns are just a way to speed it up. You're asking the horse to perform a certain way, then the body is inherently lazy. It's going to try and you be put in the least amount of effort to get the result. So it's like us if we're trying to get fit on a treadmill or anything like that. You're overweight, you everything like that. You go on a treadmill, you walk a mile, and it takes you 10 minutes. Right, okay. Well, you do that for a month and you get fitter. But what that means is your body is actually getting more efficient at what it's doing because it's too much effort to keep sweating and various things like that. So what your body does is it kind of goes, well, I'm going to get the heart stronger, to get the muscles more efficient, and so on and so forth. But you don't get the same level of improvement. You don't every single time you walk the mile. So that means you have to now run the mile to get the same level of improvement as you did a month previously. Or you've got to put it on an incline, or you've got to do something else to stress the system. Now, the reasons why that's important is because when you change a horse from racing into dressage or anything like that, you've got to understand is that you've got to allow this compensation pattern to break down and then build up a new compensatory pattern. Compensatory patterns are not bad. They're only bad when they create dysfunction or they're inefficient for what you desire the horse to do. But culturally, we have a fascinating thing, which goes back to what I was just saying, is that we believe good performance equals good health. And that's certainly something which me and Nika certainly notice because a number of times I've gone to a high performance horse and I flagged that actually the horse is performing well. I actually did this. I did this a month ago. I went to a client and they're a very high performing individual, potentially, Olympic stepping into Olympic team. Um, and I literally took photographs of the horse, and like you can see the shoulders at different angles. And I was talking to the saddle fitter, and I was like, what are you doing? Oh, no, we're flocking the saddle evenly. But the rider's then complaining because the saddle was moving. And you're sat there going, please, please, is no one looking at the asymmetry in the horse? And you're like, if you this is a high performing horse already. It's not like it was a low performing horse. It was a Grand Prix level horse with a very visible shoulder asymmetry. But the saddle fitter was working to the ideal, which was, oh, it's got to be symmetrical. You're sat there going, well, the problem with that is that then because of the shoulder being asymmetrical, that impacts the saddle. So you can't have a symmetrical. You've got to change things because the saddle is shifted. And there was a big, long conversation about it, and we eventually kind of struck some middle ground, which was really good. But it was fascinating because the owner and the rider were sat there completely perplexed because they were like, but this horse is a performance horse. This horse is like, we're literally looking at the team. We're getting onto the team. And both me and the saddler at the time were both going, yeah, but that doesn't mean the horse is healthy. It just means it's very efficient at what it's doing. And that's something which we've kind of really, if you can kind of really hit home with something, is it's understand that performance at this level, at this stage, does not equal health. Okay. Now, when we get onto the golden oldies, which by the way, I'm a lover of golden oldie horses. Okay, I absolutely love old horses, and it's a bit of a quirk. Like if you look at the society in the equine industry, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of articles, and a lot of everything, all talk about the young horse and kind of the performance horse. There's actually very little when you're talking about the older horse, and the older horse is brilliant because it has a story, it has history, and it is where I was talking about with the performance horse, it has patterns and it has efficiency and so on and so forth. With the older horse, you're not trying to go, right, we're going to keep performing, we're going to keep kind of going at Grand Prix level dressage, or kind of, you're 23 years old, you're going to jump 160. Of course you are. No, it's all about trying to keep the horse as effective and efficient as possible and keep them comfortable. Now, that doesn't mean that you suddenly just drop off like a curve. Okay. Possibly the worst thing you could ever do with an old horse is to do what we would love to do, which is retire them. And that's a human thing. Very much humans want to retire. We want to work, and then we go, right, I've done my work. I now just want to sit on the couch and do nothing. All right. That is possibly the worst thing. And there is, in humans, there's a huge problem with that because you have these people who work their entire lives and then they get to 65 or 70 and they retire, and all they do is sit on the sofa and watch TV. They're generally dead within 5 to 10 years. Okay. Now imagine that with your older horse. So even though we're kind of like, oh, that would be lovely, just living in a field doing nothing. If the horse has been doing stuff, you kind of need to do what we call a tapering of performance. Now, again, I'm going to use an example in my kind of situation. I was very fortunate that I worked with some Olympic athletes, some rowers, Olympic rowers, who decided to stop their career post Olympics. Brilliant, no problem. You've deserved it. You've got some medals. Amazing. We had to then design a 18-month to 2 year training program for them to taper them down. Now that is an extreme case, okay? You've got highly efficient humans which are almost godlike. to then basically tapering them down. So they're not having to train 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not saying that we need to do that with horses, but we also need to understand is that if this horse has been a performance horse and we are wanting to kind of go, right, it's coming to its we're now in stage 3, the veteran years, it's really important to keep them going. It's also really important to keep, for example, their environment the same. Now, that sounds really weird when I'm kind of going, oh, yeah, no, we need to keep the environment the same. It's actually really logical because their system is very, how's the most polite way of describing it? Um, their system needs to have almost prediction. If it's they like the consistency, if you see what I mean. Not consistency in training, but also consistency in life. Okay? So if they're in their latter stages and they're chopping and changing and moving yards or kind of change of routine, that can actually create a lot of difficulties for the older horse. For example, eating. If you're not feeding them at the same time in a regular kind of organized manner, that can actually have a greater impact on their stomach and on their gut mechanic. It can also have a greater impact in terms of their performance. It can have a greater impact in terms of their behavior. Dear God, you look at if the older you get, the more likely, and this is just a comical note, but as you get older, the more likely you are to suffer from something called hanger, which is being hungry and angry. Um, you see it in children. It happens quite often in children, and then in the middle years, you kind of go, "Well, if I've missed a meal, that's fine, that's no problem." But when you get older, if you miss a meal, you get angry again. So you kind of, and this is the thing, is that kind of, and this is partly why we split it into 3 kind of stages. That's kind of comical of when you are in the veteran stage, you are actually kind of very similar to the beginning stage, to the developing stage, but with a slightly different focus. With the
Bradley,
older focus,
I would say I'm in the peak years, but I'm still definitely going to say that I get hungry. Hungry. So
no, no, no.
I have my
So,
older horse tendencies.
yeah. So just as a thing, hanger is more common in females than it is in males, and that's partly quite fascinating because of hormones. And I'm not blaming hormones at all, but it is quite a common thing in the female kind of physiology. Um, so as I said, I can talk about golden oldies for ages because there's so much to kind of really look at um, with these guys. But things which I would definitely, so I'm going to give you some do's and don'ts with the golden oldies, okay, which aren't on the thing. So number one, do keep them moving, right? We want to keep the older horse moving, okay? We reduce workload spikes. So what we mean by that is don't train the horse intensely. It's 20 years old because it's going to take longer to recover. You want that consistency. So if you looked at your training in a young horse, you can do a hard training session and then leave them for 2 or 3 days, and then do a hard session and leave them. And the system will still get better. But you do that with an old horse, you train them really hard. They're crippled for the next 2 or 3 days. So what you're trying to do is you're not trying to train them hard. You're not trying to train them to the point of fatigue again, just like you do with the younger horses, but you're trying to get more of that consistency. So with an older horse, you may actually be riding them every day, but only for 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. That's it. That's more effective for them rather than trying to get them to, ride for 2 hours and then have 2 days off because I've overdone it on the 2 hours and I've got to give them time off. That's not particularly good. So with the older horse, you've got to allow for longer recovery time. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do the big rides, like you know where we love to ride the horse, you know, go out, especially in the UK, you go out riding for a hack. 2 hours later, you're in a pub. Horses are tied up outside. You're having a drink. It's fantastic. You're having a pub lunch. Get back on the horse a little bit tipsy. I shouldn't say that actually because it's illegal to do that in the UK. And then ride home. Don't think. But the point is that you've got to allow for a longer recovery time. Okay, you can do the 2 hour hack. That's not a problem, but understand they're going to be knackered the next day, so don't expect them to perform the next day. Just be kind. Just go, yeah, I'm hungover. Let's just not do that much. Fine. And that's absolutely fine. Um, the really important thing with older horses is to monitor behavioral changes. Now, if you've had this horse for a long period of time, you know the horse. Okay. So if commonly behavioral changes will occur, especially in an older horse, they will occur before the actual problem arises. Okay. Because the older horse has so much compensatory history and everything like that. You will notice the horse having a behavioral change. They might be a little bit, for example, doing up the girth. They suddenly start kind of turning their head or flicking their ear or reacting. Look at the subtle changes, especially in an older horse. Okay. We want to maintain that muscle. We want to maintain that mobility, which goes back to that kind of consistency of training. Okay. Now, things which I don't, or things which I wouldn't suggest or wouldn't do with an older horse. Okay. And there's only five of them, which I wouldn't do with an older horse. I would never, with a horse over the age of 20, I would never chase perfection. I would never chase symmetry. In the most polite way possible, love the horse and love them for their quirks and their asymmetry. Okay. Don't think, right, you're 20 years old, I've got to try and get the muscle mass even. I'm sorry, like it's so much easier to develop muscle in the 0 to 10 years old and from the 10 to 20s. You're older. It's like having an 80-year-old, it's like having your grandmother or your grandfather go into the gym to try and pack on muscle to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not going to happen, right? It's just not. So don't try and get this bodybuilding effect in an older horse. Don't make sudden management changes. Okay, it shocks the system. As I said, older horses, they're kind of like old people. They like consistency, they like prediction, they like things where they are. So don't make any massive sudden management changes. Okay, that's number two. Number three, don't overcorrect long established compensations. If the horse has a quirk, okay, in its movement or compensation, and it's 20 years old, I'm sorry, don't try and overcorrect it. You can reduce it, you can reduce the compensation. Don't try and correct it. Just let it be, enjoy it for what it is. Um, I wouldn't assume that stiffness equals laziness. Okay? Stiffness in an older horse does not equal laziness. It could be because it's bloody cold outside and the horse is stiff and it's going to take longer to warm up. Okay, so if I'm riding an older horse, I would not assume that a little bit of little bit of stiffness is the horse being lazy. Okay, I would not judge older horses against young horse expectations. That's more for humans, it's not for horses. And that's a common thing in our society is that we judge an older horse compared to young horses. That's like trying to compete. That's like you and me trying to compete with, well, Nika's a lot younger than what I am. But it's like me going to the gym or exercising and trying to compete with a 20-year-old. Yeah, that's not going to happen. No. but we as a society, we do kind of have this expectation that the older horse has to compete against or compete with young horses. No. So those are my kind of five don'ts, really, with the older horse. Okay.
Love it. We're going to go into the third bit, which is the diagnostic blueprint. Let's see if I can minimize us. So for those of you that want to take a screenshot of this, this is like the practical side, stage 3 of this webinar. Still good for time. So these are the signs that you can actually see and feel at home stage by stage. So Bradley and I have obviously gone through the three, and then we've now just put it into a table for you to screenshot and just to refer back to, but I'll just talk you through it. So the building phase, that 0 to 10, what is happening internally is we have this fatigue-driven pattern breakdown and inconsistency sequencing. So this is why it is so important with the young horses is to keep things short, keep sessions short. We also don't want to push them into a situation where we look at it as naughty behavior, but if we actually tracked what we did with the horse for the last week, last month, we would see, actually, you know what? We've done 4 or 5 really hard sessions, and maybe this is just a tired young horse. Another thing that I really advocate for, and I know Bradley does as well, he's hinted to it earlier, which is taking photos of your young horses, well, any horse, but for me, especially these young horses that change in their structure, they suddenly go croup high, or they suddenly you think, oh my God, where's that wither come from? And then the saddle fit is out, and we're trying to fit the saddle because it's got to stay in work, and then you think to yourself, are we doing more harm here than good? And are we pushing this horse to fatigue during a very vital stage? So signs we can see at home to look out for. And again, the best way if you're thinking, well, sometimes they are a bit erratic and sometimes the balance isn't there and sometimes they're really good in the arena and sometimes they're not. Start tracking what you're doing on those days and what the horse is showing, and you'll quickly see the pattern emerge. So the signs that we can see at home are things like messiness, rhythm isn't always there. They lose the balance, especially for those of us that have maybe starting young horses, and the walk and trot feels great, and then the canter feels great in a large field. The minute you go on a circle, it's like you're on a motorbike, and you're like, oh my God, this is like riding a ironing board around a circle. And then we start thinking, do we put side reins and things on? And that's when we have to go back to that, actually assessing where the horse currently is, looking at their structure again, and maybe going into too much detail here. And Bradley did say earlier, we're kind of touching on the surface of what we know and do here. And if you're listening to this going like, I really want to know the nitty gritty, more specific exercises, Nika and Bradley, tell us, and we can do another section on that. And Bradley, I'm sure you would agree with that. But
Oh yeah.
um, just to kind of keep it for where we are today. Um, Another kind of sign you'll see is this like kind of sudden, persistent preference for one rein. Often people will say to me, well, last month we were good on both reins. This side I can't turn left. Like there's got to be a problem. This sometimes what can feel quite exaggerated or uncontrolled movement. I know I remember sitting on a young PRE that had found his fourth or fifth gear in medium trot, and it was riding it as the rider. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this movement. Never mind this young horse, and it suddenly went from a very nice, correct trot for dressage to when he found his medium trot, it like almost destabilized the entire trot. And then it wasn't a case of us putting more force and pressure on him. It was actually a case of going, let's just let him and me play with this new level, this new gear, this new kind of Ferrari engine we found. And, 8, 11, 12 weeks later, which you might sit there going 12 weeks, but actually through allowing him to feel unbalanced, feel a bit uncoordinated. For me, the rider, got to take full responsibility, feeling like I was being catapulted out the seat about a foot. That that changed over time. But the worst thing that I could have done was force that and try and control that. I actually allowed him to find his own feet, to recognize, I've got this power behind, and now I need to just allow myself time. This is obviously with the young horses. When we look at our peak 10 to 20, so what is actually happening internally, Bradley did discuss this, but it was this kind of refined peak athlete you have. So they can almost have this accumulative overload, which is disguised. Okay, it can be hidden. And this is the key thing why tracking and looking at what you're doing with your horse is so, so important. Signs that we can see is they might have the same level of performance, but you might notice that suddenly they just like start sweating more. There's much more effort going into this. It's very subtle, and that's the key thing here. Remember, the young horses, it's very like messy, uncoordinated, chaotic, erratic. And then you got the peak athletes, which are subtle changes. So it might be just changes in your smoothness of your transitions. It might be that this one-sidedness now becomes like a fixed asymmetry, and you just, no matter how much you put your leg on that right side of the rib cage, it ain't moving. And these are the signs. And then we got our beautiful oldies, golden oldies. What's happening inside is that we, as Bradley said, want to keep things so consistent, very predictable, very almost boring. Okay, but boring is good because they know what's coming, they can adapt. And when we start to change things, we start to see that the capacity has fundamentally been exceeded. And then we get into the shift of a compensation that was always there to support the system, and it has been doing that for many years. It now becomes a problem because we've decided to change something, which the predictable, boring management is good for them. They like that. And the signs that we can see at home are things like, um, you know, really struggling, reluctance. You might have gone out for a lovely ride yesterday, and then without knowing, because you were just chatting away about something, and you ended up being an hour and 45 minutes instead of your normal hour. Then the next day you get on and you're like, oh my God, the horse is just he won't go forward. And we just think to ourselves, actually, whoa, did we do way too much yesterday? Did we exceed that capacity, which has now led to something? Um, and I will let Bradley do the next bit, talking about
Yep.
systems drift. I'll get our faces
Ah.
back on.
No. So one thing to add with what Nika said in the previous slide, one thing which I get a lot of my customers to do when they have youngsters is to measure the wither height and the bum height. Okay. Or sometimes what I get them to do, if they've got like a brick wall behind or anything like that, is get them to stand the horse against a brick wall and take a photo. So what you're trying to do there is you're subtly trying to go, because quite often I'll have a customer with a young horse, um, and they said, "Oh, the horse has gone wrong. I need you out." And my first question is, "Has it grown?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." Right? Can you just go and measure the wither height, measure the bum height, compare it to what Here's the numbers, because I generally go out and I measure horses as well because I'm a nerd. Um, and then basically they then send me the numbers back, or I send them my original kind of heights, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, it has grown," or the bums come up. So you sit there and go, right. It may not actually be a mechanical issue. It is, but it may not be a therapeutic issue. It may just be a growth thing. So it's really important if you are going to measure. Um, it sounds really weird, especially with a young horse. Measure their wither and measure their bum. Okay, because horses will sometimes, as we all know, bum first, then wither, and they do that. So that's what I do. But it's something which, as Nika said, measure numbers, all of that type of stuff. Um, so synthesis, what we call system drift. Right. It's actually, this is how basically the cycle works. And how a problem from a therapeutic perspective or a therapist perspective, this is how problems occur. And I'm showing you how problems occur. And if you don't, if you do the opposite to this and you actually don't do this, you don't get problems. Well, it's not that you don't get problems, but you are substantially likely to reduce. Now, Nika did turn around to me and said, "Are we actually giving away exactly how horses break and actually ruining our jobs?" Um, and I was like, "Well, yeah, we are doing that, but that's kind of how we work. Both me and Nika want to help people and want things to be fixed. But this is how systems break. For example, you might be training the horse for an extended period of time. That is what we call high load. That causes fatigue. That causes muscle soreness. Okay, that causes muscle stiffness. Because that horse is now fatigued, tired, stiff, you get a drop in coordination. Okay, so what that means, okay, and that drop in coordination, you suddenly think, oh, is the horse stumbling, tripping? No, when we say coordination drops, it actually means that the stride shortens. Okay, so it's like us. You go for a run, when you start getting tired, your stride then shortens. You start doing lots of little steps because it's more efficient, it's more effective. That's what we mean by saying coordination drops. Okay? The horse, you start off, it's doing these lovely big strides and everything like that, and you're like, wow, this is a lot of movement. This is fantastic. This is amazing. And then the horse gets tired, and you're kind of like, why aren't you doing the extensions? Why aren't you moving and such loose and mobile? Because it's got fatigued, it's got tired. All of a sudden, the stride shortens. That's the coordination. So the horse shortens the stride to actually maintain coordination, to maintain balance. Okay, so it's really important that you kind of understand that. What that means then, if you keep pushing, and because you've shortened that horse has shortened the stride, the system compensates. So what we mean by that is actually the muscles get tight. They're bracing now. They're not moving and expanding and contracting in a lovely loose way. They are now tired. So what they're doing is they're not engaging as much and they're not going through such big range. So actually now the muscles are compensating. You've got what we call a buildup of lactic acid, which causes the stiffness and problems in the muscle. Now, what that means is the muscle is not moving as much. That's where your system is compensating. And then it goes up into the fourth dynamic, which is the nervous system embeds the new pattern. Okay. So now, because the body is still moving and being asked to move, and the body is stiff or tired or fatigued, and it's got a reduced range of movement, and you keep going, no, I've got to push through this. I've got to get this horse to stride out or move bigger. The nervous system is remembering. Now, and then what that does is because the nervous system remembers, and this is something which kind of is relatively newly being understood in training philosophy, is that that nervous system, you may finish the training session, okay? And you may put the horse back and everything like that. But the nervous system remembers so that when you next bring the horse out, the nervous system, okay, and I'm saying it in isolation, which it really shouldn't, it isn't. It's more complicated than that, but I'm trying to keep it relatively simple, is that the nervous system predicts because you've trained it hard for 2 or 3 sessions, and let's just say you have. I'm not saying you have now, but you have. Um, the nervous system predicts what's going to happen. So because it's predicting what happened last time, what is it going to do? It is going to go, well, actually, I'm going to start off with a shortened stride. I'm going to start because then I know that the training session is an hour long, but I get tired at 30 minutes. So that's what happened last time, but I still kept on going. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm not going to do a big stride at the beginning. I'm now going to go shorter. I'm doing a short stride because then I'm more efficient. I can do a shorter stride for a longer amount of time. So and that's where you get into this kind of spiral, this cycle going round and round and round. And ultimately it leads to a breakdown of the body. So that is how problems occur. And it's really quite fascinating when you actually understand how problems occur. How do you fix it? Because you do the exact opposite. You do shortened training sessions. You don't get to the point of fatigue. You don't, which then doesn't cause the coordination drop. It doesn't cause the shortened stride. It doesn't cause a compensatory mechanic or the system to compensate. And actually, it doesn't influence negatively the nervous system. So you keep the horse looser for longer. And that's how horses ultimately happen. And that's why therapists are, in the most polite way possible, really busy. Because that's what that's how systems break.
I've
So
also,
yeah,
can I give an example here, which is
yes.
a personal one for me, and to just give people, because it's so unnatural for us to want to slow down, especially when it comes to our horses. We're like, no, 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 they must do it. I don't know what train we think they need to or we need to be on, but an example for me, which is this exact spiral, is when I was training to become a flat jockey. It was like going to military camp, school. It was, oh my God, the level of everything was so intense. But the one thing we used to do was every evening at 7 o'clock was go for a run up the gallops, so the furlongs. And I was the oldest at the time there in this group of young, like lads that were probably like 14, 15 years old. I was already 18. And I was so competitive that I decided to ignore my nervous system and keep going. And I was hoping no one's eating right now, but I was sick at the end. Now, I haven't pushed myself that hard since then. Now, picking up running, however many years on, I won't say because that will tell you how old I am. The minute I start running, and I'm someone who's pretty fit already, like I do weight training, I do boxing, I can do what I can run for a minute and check my heart rate, and it spikes to around, this might surprise you, it spikes to around 180. It's like my whole system shuts. And it's purely that nervous system embedded because I ignored the load, I ignored the coordination dropping, and this is exactly the spiral that Bradley's talking about and how important it is, but also how amazing the body is at remembering it. And so the best way I can do right now is if I want to run, is slow the running down so that I don't push myself. But for human nature, even though I know all this, it is like, no, push yourself. And it's also, I just want to say, like, a lot of it is actually understanding it for ourselves to help us with our horses.
So that's really fascinating because what you've touched on there is an aspect of what we call burnout and PTSD and performance PTSD, which is really common. And horses do suffer it as well. You know, if you imagine, like as I said, I was an ex-Olympic level rower. So I used to sit on a rowing machine. I used to be able to sit on a rowing machine for 2 hours and just row. I can't even look at the machine now because I've spent a huge amount of my time sat on the thing. I hate it. And you get this almost PTSD that you just don't want to touch it. Now, the same thing and the same principle can happen in horses. And that's where you get the horses burnout, where they just kind of go, right, they've just jacked it in. Horses have completely jacked it. They just don't want to do it. Now, I've seen that in horses with show jumpers, where they've had their tendons checked, they've had the coffin joints checked, they've had everything. There is nothing mechanically wrong, but because of the trauma which they've had early on in their lives from being pushed so hard, and also not meaning to sound rude, and this isn't necessarily the time or place to talk about it, where they've had unconventional or inaccurate methodologies kind of treated and done to them, that they have created this kind of almost PTSD within the horse, and that's why then they jack it in. So you quite rightly you've just touched on to another element which occurs in training, and that's also why it's quite fascinating with the older horse is that sometimes you might get hold of a performance horse or a mature horse and go, we're just gonna go off and do some fun. And the mature horse is there going, no, I'm not doing that. No, go away. I'm no, never. And you're really confused. And you're like, yeah, but why? Why don't you want to go into the arena and actually work or engage and everything like that? And it could be that you're dealing with some kind of deep rooted emotional trauma. Because the thing is we look at the nervous system, for example, and I'm talking about the nervous system in isolation, but the nervous system, it doesn't just carry like nerves to engage muscles or to kind of move away from pain or coordination. Emotions also are embedded within, and emotional responses are embedded within nerves and how they fire. And it's quite fascinating. You know, think about your brain when you're in love, when you're kind of unhappy, when you're kind of giggling, all of those things. It's your nerves, it's your nervous system firing. So you have emotions, and quite like rightly so, horses have emotions when they are training. And if the emotions are negative, it's going to cause trauma. It's going to cause things. So you're absolutely right. You know, talk about your experience is with the vomiting. Um, got a little bit of PTSD there. Um,
A little
that's fine. We all have it, and that's coming from therapists. Who, so I apologize.
bit.
A little bit weird that a therapist is there, kind of going, "Yeah, PTSD. That's quite normal. Yeah, everyone has it." Should be advocating that actually no, it's not good, it's not healthy. I apologize. For clarity, I do like counseling and various things like that. So I am a multi-trained practitioner, so I can kind of joke about it, but I also professionally that just make light of it. It's fine. It's okay. So yeah, right. Um, Action plan. Well, this is essentially kind of reiterating what kind of said earlier in the diagram. Um, but it's a couple of changes which you can do literally right now, and that was the big thing which we want to kind of hand over to you. Is that if you have got a youngster, keep your sessions short. Now, obviously, that's a big question. Like, how short is short? Um, Genuinely, with a young horse, depending on their age bracket, um, you're looking at 20 minutes to half an hour. Okay. Now, when the horses are, you know, let's say they're 9, um, you can go for 45 minutes. But then there's a couple of other factors which you have to include, such as air temperature. You know, what is if it's 30, 40 degrees weather, it's possibly not a good idea to train for 40 minutes in midday heat when it's 40 degrees. The horses are going to get tired and fatigued. You know what? Do it in normal air temperature. Um, Obviously, with a 5-year-old, don't do 40 minutes. Do like 20 minutes, half an hour. They're going to get tired, you know. And that's why we're explaining before is that it's not that they're physically going to get tired. They're not going to be puffing, but neurologically and muscular wise, they're going to get tired. That's when they get the breakdown of the coordination. Okay, so just think about it logically. Okay. Um, Big thing is stop when the movement is organized, not when they are tired. So this goes back to a training thing. Is when you if you're working on transitions or you're working on something and they give it to you and you get a really good movement out of them, quit. Stop immediately. Okay. Brilliant, well done. You get a hug and a pat and everything. You get loads of carrots. Done. Don't try and get it a second time. Don't try and get it a third time because it will not be as good. And that comes from years of riding horses. It's the most frustrating thing. But the best thing is stop immediately, put them away, bring them out back. You can bring them back out tomorrow and try again, and it'll probably give it to you even quicker then. And then you build and build and build. But you've got to start with a lot of sympathy and empathy. Um, with again in kind of the young age, we want the quality of the movement, not the duration. Quite often, I'm sat with people and just going, "Your horse is tracking up. It's a young horse. Brilliant. That's it." You know that we're not trying to get you to suddenly go right. I want the horse tracking up and engaging and all the time. Like, just again, not the length of time, just the quality. Quality is way better in the early stages. Um, if you got their kind of middle age, and so where they're mature and or their peak performance stage, hard days really do need proper recovery days. So again, look as if it's you. If I was to get you in a gym and I was to get you sweating and pumping iron and kind of all of that type of stuff for an hour, you're going to be sore the next day. We've all seen people train and then they can't walk down the stairs the next day because their legs are so stiff. You might make a bit of fun out of them, but I generally do. My wife certainly does do that to me. But the point is that when you train hard, and there is nothing wrong with training hard, you've got to have a good recovery day. Okay, and recovery day doesn't mean time off. Recovery day means like like movement, but just no pressure. So, i.e., take them out for a hack or just walk around the arena, but don't
Mm,
expect them to perform 2 days on the trot. Okay.
mm,
When we start looking at high performance, we got to balance high demand training with active low stress recovery. So what we mean by that is if you were to do what Nika says, which is start plotting your training, okay? And typically in a normal training program, you need to have it almost like a wave pattern. So you have light, medium, hard training, medium, light training, medium, hard, medium, light. So every day is a different type of training. But what you're doing is you're doing this kind of wave pattern. Um, and the reason why is to protect that. This is where it's really important to understand. You're trying to protect their highly tuned system from what we call cumulative overload. If you keep training hard every single day, you get something called a recovery debt because
mm,
you don't recover enough within 24 hours. Again, a note from when I was a high performance athlete, it was really fascinating that we would have a hard training day, and we would train like I used to train 3 times a day, and it was like 6 to 7 hours a day. It was horrible. Um, like we're almost to the point where we were overtraining, but that's GB rowing for you. Um, Love them, but they do overtrain. But from those days, it would take us 3 days to recover.
mm,
So there were and I was a very fit young man. But it was fascinating because we used to have to check our heart rate every morning. We used to have bloods taken every morning from little pinprick tests. And it would take us, on average, 3 days to recover from an extremely hard training session.
mm,
And that's the thing is you've got to understand the recovery is really important. And that's humans. Now, to my knowledge, that none of those tests are done on horses currently in terms of their performance monitoring or what we call recovery debt monitoring. Um, there are some countries which are looking into it. There's 1 or 2 countries I know which are looking into it, but the blood tests are not as effective as they are with humans because we have a lot more data with humans than we do with horses on it. So it's an evolving process at the moment. This kind of principle or theory of recovery debt. Um, in humans, it's been long standing. I think it's been for the last 20 odd years. We've got science on it, but equine, no, very little. And then we go to older horses. 20 plus, the golden oldies, gotta love them. Primary thing, keep the routines steady. Really, really simple. As I said, avoid sudden spikes in workload. So don't suddenly kind of go, right, we're going off to do a really intensive period of a week-long training. You may absolutely love it with your coach, but your horse is going to hate you by day 2 or 3, and you are not going to get what you want out of it, and it's going to cause more problems.
mm,
So consistency is king. Consistent movement to support their functional compensations. As I said before, they've got compensations within their system. Do not try and make them be symmetrical. Do not try and make them perfect. They're old. They've got a story. They've got a history. Love them for it, and just work with that system. But yeah, it's that to a degree, it's those are the changes which you can do almost immediately. So
Awesome. We've got just two slides to show you guys, and then
yeah,
we will answer any questions. I know there's a few things in the chat. So just a bit of a recap. We know we started this whole thing with the three different sections. We described there as three different aging, different languages, and why this building the peak and the reorganizing the systems is a totally different approach. And hopefully you can see from how we've described it how important it is to understand that. We then went into section two of like what warning signs we can actually look for and these really early indicators. I would almost say they're a little bit easier in the younger horse and the golden oldies. But with the peak horses, the that middle stage, it's so subtle, and it's because they are those refined, highly tuned systems. So the biggest thing I'd say with the warnings, if you're really sat here going, I don't know where to start, we've got something for you coming up in the next slide. But I would say is just start with basic tracking. Like a lot of, we've just had quite a nice heat wave here in England, and those kind of training trips that you might have done last year to Summerford probably felt really good, and this year felt awful because the humidity, the heat, that is a huge impact on your horse's system and yours. And a lot of us, because we're not adapted and used to that heat, we underestimate not only what it does on the day, but the recovery days. And that is the key thing. When you track, you will quickly notice, oh my God, I get it. And then the last thing we spoke about was, the last thing Bradley said was that action, like what you can do from a management training perspective that you can implement tomorrow. So, what we have is the question that you might be sat here going is, okay, this was great. I can see the sections, but how can I actually apply this to my own horse? I don't know about you, but especially when I haven't owned a horse for years, but when I had my own dog, I was almost a bit blinded because I loved him so friggin' much and the emotion got wrapped up. And so when it came to really understanding his symptoms, I would get all mushy. Whereas if I had someone else's horse or dog in front of me, I'd keep it very logical. And we've obviously described things here to you in a very logical manner, which you probably sat here going, yeah, yeah, yeah. But when it comes to your own mushy ball of love, that you just go, oh, God, I don't know where to start. So if this is you and you're thinking, I don't know what to do, we've actually got this, which is, we've called it the Lifetime Horse Assessment Toolkit. And it helps you just read your horse in afternoon, morning, or whatever time of day it is with you. It's in three stages. So again, the stage finder, the warning signs checklist, and an action plan. So pretty much how we've structured today is how this toolkit comes to you. Uh, Normally this is £47, but for tonight, for you guys joining us, we've got it for 27. If you want it, scan the QR code. I'll give you a minute to do that. And then you can fill out your payment details and you get an automated email with access to those three things that I've just shared. And as I have said and promised, we will now do some Q&A. So get your questions ready. I know we've gone, well, we're almost at the 90 minutes. So if some of you have to go, no problem. But once you've done that, I will press stop record. And for those of you that do want to ask a question, either type it in the chat or just raise a hand and I will unmute you. Okay, I'm going to, if everyone has got that, you can either just take a screenshot of it and look at it later. I'm going to press stop. Stop share. And then I'm going to stop record without kicking everyone out the room. Stop recording.